No problem. So the way that this came about, that I'm speaking to you, is that Karen Sewell and I have we're friends, and we talk a lot about teaching the Bible to women, and we've been having conversations, well, for years really, about that. And she's been a huge encouragement and inspiration to me in that. And we were speaking just a few weeks, well, not a few months ago. I've been talking to her all the way through since we moved to America about setting up Bible study and that kind of thing. And she asked me to come and speak to the Amy wives, pastors' wives. We did that. And then she said, this might be a good idea. I thought she might be sitting beside me asking me questions, but it turns out just me. But she said it might be helpful if I explain to you how I got trained in handling the word. And so I actually became a Christian when I was at university, at Leeds University. I come from a family that's kind of culturally Anglican, but not gospel, but village church, that kind of stuff. Hadn't really heard the gospel, I don't think, until I got to university. And so I got to university, and a friend witnessed to me, and I came to faith. And she took me along to Titus Trust, the northern version of Titus Trust, the Glod camps. And really that was the start of me realizing that God's word is powerful. And the way in which those guys invested in me and trained me and equipped me in handling the word and beginning to think about teaching it to others. You do it with your young people. And I was really struck by how much those leaders lived and breathed the word of God, and how it was a part of their everyday. That was like the power that God was working through his spirit, through his word, by his spirit. And that was just really evident in the way that they were going about it. And that was really, they invested in me as an assistant leader for 3 years. And that groundwork, reading with me and all those kind of things, gave me this kind of foundation, that then that conviction that God really is powerfully working through his word. After university, I went off and I was a teacher, an English teacher in Leeds, and I was going to a church in Leeds, and they were really big on one-to-oneing with students. So I got involved in that. And that was kind of the training ground in many ways for teaching the Bible, where I just would read with whoever is up for it, and began to really get the bug. Like, this is amazing. Like, you get the Bible open with people, and God works, and you begin to see people grow. And I was growing, and all of these things. So I was teaching, and I was doing that, and the one-to-oneing and the teaching the Bible kind of began to just kind of mushroom, and I was doing more and more. So I thought I would take a year out of teaching and get some training, some formal training. So I guess I've been informally trained through the various people in my life up until that point. And then my plan was to take a year out, get some proper training in Bible teaching, and then go back to teaching in a different school. So I went down to St. Helens, Bishopsgate, and I thought I'd just do a year of their associate scheme. And then they persuaded me to stay for another year. And then I actually ended up working for St. Helens. I was the city women's worker it was about 2-3 years. And Jonathan and I got married just before that time. So I was then kind of in the formal role. And my role there was doing lots of one-to-ones and leading Bible studies, giving a few talks, being part of that culture where word ministry is just so kind of key to everything that they're about. And then we moved back up north, up to Leyland, with 10 of those, and I just kept on trying to get the Bible open with as many people as possible. We've got 2 young children. Nap time is really helpful to be able to make that happen. And I helped out a bit with the Northwest Partnership things with Justin. And so that's kind of my background. And then we at that point decided to move to America for the 10 of those to kind of come and start up 10 of those USA. And my real concern was, I don't know, you land in a new country, and you know what church is going to be like, and am I going to have any opportunity to get the word open with people? Because that is like my absolute joy and delight. And we, by God's grace, landed in a church where it was a small church, but the guy in charge had been teaching the Bible faithfully. He started the church 10 years ago, and he'd been teaching the Bible faithfully, and it was familiar. American Christianity is just a wide, there's just so much variety within that. It's huge, and culturally, it's one of the most different things about living in America, the church. And so we were grateful to find a church which was familiar, was expositional teaching, word conviction that God is working through his word. And so we kind of got stuck in, but then the pandemic hit, and that was about 4 months after we moved here. So that was pretty rough relationally on every front. But what happened was, so I was supposed to be coming back I was going to be teaching at the Northern Women's Convention. And so I'd been, I mean, when you have small children, you just got to prep well in advance for these things. So I'd spent basically most of the year in Isaiah. I was going to be teaching a bit on Isaiah. So I had all this kind of material that I was planning to teach. So I was really, when you're in the word and you're in that book, you're like you're kind of overflowing with it. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do? The conference was cancelled. So I started reading Isaiah 1-to-1 with basically anyone who was up for it. And the beauty of the church was that the guy in charge had been teaching faithfully, expositionally. So this pretty young congregation, mainly in their 30s, really 30, maybe 20s and 30s, were really word hungry. Like they absolutely knew that they wanted to hear God's word. They want to be in God's word. And so there was a real desire to do that. And I kind of just was, you sort of throw out the seed, don't you, to put it out to a few people. Reading 1-to-1 is actually quite unusual over here, I'm realizing. It's not as much of a kind of a normal thing to do. And so that was a bit of an alien concept. And we were doing it over Zoom because of the pandemic. But so the reason why I'm telling you all of this is because this is the kind of the seedbed from which a women's work and a women's Bible study came about. So our church didn't really have a women's work when we arrived. It had Bible studies popping up and kind of happening for a few weeks. And then when that study had finished, so there's lots of published resources over here. So they would do, the Nancy Guthrie study or whatever it may be. So that takes you for 10 weeks. And then if there was no one up for leading the next one, then it would just there'd be nothing there. And in terms of then women having opportunity to do things, there wasn't loads of that. So it was a fairly, while it's a church that's been going for 10 years, actually it's kind of fledgling on that front. And so as we got some 1-to-1, I was reading 1-to-1 with people, and we then, a couple of those people said, why don't we do a little women's Bible study on Isaiah, on this that you're teaching at the moment. And so we started a backyard Bible study. This is during the pandemic, so it all had to be outside. So we started a backyard Bible study out in my garden here, and I had about 12 people come along. And at that, I mean, there was such joy in being together. That pandemic feeling where you just haven't been together and you're together hearing the word, and so there was such joy in that. And I think then we thought, well, so a couple of older women in the church thought, why don't we kind of formally create a women's Bible study in the church? So we kind of moved from my backyard into a kind of more formal, this is the church women's Bible study. And we kind of gave it a go. And I expected about 12 people to come, but we actually got about 25 people that first time round. And that at that point, it was just me doing the teaching. So I know Mark's gospel pretty well. So, and I've taught that before. So we did Mark's gospel as our first thing. And we just did it kind of exponentially, going through it as you would. During that time, so I'm thinking, I cannot be the one person to be doing this. And so in terms of, if I don't know what your churches are like, where you're at in terms of women's work. Maybe you have a flourishing women's work, or maybe you're just at the kind of beginning stages of thinking about that. If you have one person, one woman who is kind of eager and maybe equipped and maybe keen, or maybe not quite equipped, but keen to make it happen, is hungry, the next step, I would say, is equipping and training someone else in order that you're not just doing it on your own. So I knew that I needed to multiply myself in some ways. So what I started doing was reading 1-to-1 very deliberately with a girl who I actually didn't know that well, but I'd been in a small group with, and I thought, she's hungry for the word. She's kind of got a bit of time. She didn't have kids yet. And I said to her, why don't we read 1-to-1 with the express purpose that you would be able to open up the Bible with someone else. And I'm not, at this point, I'm not thinking about women's Bible study at all, really. I'm just thinking, how do we begin to get the culture going and amongst the women that they feel able to open up the Bible with each other, that they're not dependent upon the pastor or someone who's got some sort of theological training. Actually, this is just, God is powerfully at work through his word. And can we be confident enough in that, that we would then be eager and feel able to get the Bible open with someone? So me and this girl, Heidi, we read Ephesians. This was still kind of pandemic time, so a lot of outside cups of tea and going through Ephesians together with deliberate equipping of her to give her confidence that she could understand the Bible. And with then at the end of Ephesians, we thought, okay, well, who amongst all these women at church, who might you be able to try and get that word open with? And so she started reading with someone else, and that was like a joy and a delight and amazing that it was all kind of happening, because then the aim is that would then multiply and multiply and multiply. It hasn't quite gone like that, but what has happened is that Heidi and I said, why don't for our next Bible study book, why don't we do Ephesians, and you and I will teach Ephesians together to the Hope. Our church is called Hope Women. Now, I think this has happened more quickly than it might happen in some churches. So we went from having a group of 12, which is, I can handle that as a small group, but then we were at like 25, 30, and you need small groups, obviously discussion groups, to be able to make that work. And because we haven't had a women's Bible study very much before, very few of these women in the church are equipped and have led or facilitated a discussion before. So it meant that the way in which we structured the Bible study had to be really kind of scaffolding that and looking to grow these women kind of along the way. So what we decided to do was have the meat of the session. So we meet on a Tuesday evening. We'd have the meat of the session being the discussion. And that's what you'd expect, isn't it? That's a very kind of, that's what we would say a Bible study is. But in order to scaffold it so that more women feel confident to lead, so they're not just looking to the person who's done it before, who is an expert in some way, we have a 5-minute introduction where we just are we're kind of getting us into the ballpark of the passage, hitting the big idea, maybe giving an illustration to try and get everyone in the room in the zone. And then you hand over to the small group people where we have centrally written the discussion questions, and I'm gradually training people to write questions. But over here in America, not many people write their own Bible study questions. So that's a really steep learning curve that we're kind of broaching, and I'm just one by one training people to do that. And then at the end of the discussion, we have about 40 minutes of discussion time. At the end of that, we have a 10-15 minute kind of summary, like pulling it together, basically hitting the main point, seeing the application, so that in the discussion group, the leaders feel freedom to let the discussion run its course, rather than panicking that they're not going to hit the main point, that they need to like really just get it absolutely right, because otherwise how is everyone going to go away with the main point? So what I found is that by having those kind of bookends of upfront teaching, it then frees up the discussion group to really run with what the women are kind of thinking and saying. And gradually, so we've been going for 2 years now, gradually training these small group leaders to know how to track with the discussion, how to pull it back in, how to sort of direct it, when to let it run, all those kind of skills that I think we kind of feel are fairly intuitive, but if you've never done it before. So the reason for sort of explaining all of that is like wherever you are at in terms of your women's work, whether there's a Bible study or not, and how able your women feel, I think one of the key things is to really think through how, as the leadership of the church, you can help scaffold a women's work so that women feel enabled. There's not a big gap. So they're not like, well, I need to hit the standard of being, like my elders, like I need to be that good. But how are we kind of all on a continuum of being able to understand the word for ourselves, being able to open that up with someone else, being able to, we've gone from having me just being the person teaching to now I have a teaching team of 5 of us, and we're now taking it in turns, and I'm giving a lot of feedback and a lot of training, a lot of helping people to get to the point where they feel that they can teach to a group like that. And that in terms of that continuum as well, I think what's been really helpful is we have an ongoing continuum. So everyone who comes along to Women's Bible Study, we have a prep book that we've written that is helping people to dig into the text before they get to the discussion. So there in the prep book, there'll be about 6 questions that they are tasked with having a go at that week. And then we have about half of them are sort of text digging question, kind of dig deeper style tools that would help you get into the text, equipping them to really feel like they could understand it themselves. And then a few of the why questions, like beginning to think big picture and how it hits the heart. And then the discussion questions are a different set of questions, but then that's gradually pulling it through to the heart. But so you've got everyone on a continuum of everyone is being helped a little bit to be able to understand the Bible for themselves by getting those tools going. And then you've got the leaders of the small group who are just maybe a little bit further along, and the level of prep required from them is higher because they're having to do that whole discussion. And then you've got the teaching team who are really they're writing the questions, they're doing those things. So you have this kind of continuum. In terms of so that's the kind of the layout, that's how it works, that's what we're doing, and it's been fruitful, and I'm really encouraged by the way in which it's going, and I'm excited by all the equipping and training that's happening. In terms of how the pastor has helped that happen, we're in an interesting situation actually, because our pastor has just changed, and while the guy who started the church, and he was in charge for 11 years, he was a great expositional preacher. He was a guy who really believed in the kind of organic growth of things within the church. So we don't have many structures in the church. Hence, I think why we haven't really had a women's work, and things. It's all been quite dependent upon who's up for doing something, and then that kind of organically kind of emerges. So when I turned up and was like, why don't we start teaching the women the Bible, that kind of thing, he's like, okay, well, yeah, this is a good idea, let's go for it. He was what I would say was a reactive supporter of it. So he was just happy to let it run and then kind of say this is a great idea as it was going, which kind of let it happen. And I think partly the reason why it happened was pandemic things, just kind of were a bit absent at all places. But actually this new guy we've got in now is, I would say, much more helpful to me as the person leading the women's work, because rather than it being organic and me slightly having to work out what he thinks about things just from the way that he's conducting himself, and I knew his theology, his complementarian theology, because it kind of manifested itself in the way he taught and the way he was, but he never articulated that. Whereas the guy we've got in now is really eager to articulate where he stands on things. And as a woman trying to do ministry within this leadership structure, that's so helpful, because I then know where I stand, and I know where we're going to work well together, and where maybe I'm going to struggle a bit or he's going to struggle a bit. And so it feels like he's much more proactive in how he's going about doing it with me. And I feel much more like he is, it's not that we've sort of snuck in the back door and have a women's Bible study going. He's much more, okay, where does this fit in the structure of the church? And how can I be transparent about that? And how can I make that clear to the church that we fully support what's going on? So he helpfully came to the first session of our semester and stood up and said, I'm in full support of this, and prayed for us. And he came to the last session and he stood up and said, this has been great. This is what I've heard. I've been in conversation with these people. I know this is a good thing. and he prayed for us. And that's just really small, but the volumes it spoke about where we sit in the church was just really helpful. And I think from a complementarian point of view, that really helps functional complementarianism to happen. Because if the complementarian theology says we really value women, but often it's not visible, that valuing is not visible, whether it's be on a Sunday morning or how the church is structured. But to have him saying that and making it really visible, that is a functional kind of valuing of women and acknowledging that women have gifts and that this is a really good thing. Because I think one of the things that's happened, because we didn't have a women's work and there hasn't been a huge number of opportunities for women to do much in the church, no one really knew that we had this wealth of potential and wise women and eager women. And you start a women's Bible study and suddenly you realize that you've got people who are able to lead small groups, who love to get alongside people, who actually could stand up and teach people, who, all of these things. So it's been a thing for the church to work out what to do with that, because the women previously, we were just kind of a little bit not seen. And that, if that had carried on, I don't know. I don't know. That's something I've just kind of been thinking through. It's been interesting to reflect, having a new guy in, to then see the difference in that. The other thing he's been doing, which is really helpful, every Thursday, he has a sort of scripture and sermon session, and he's invited a range of people. There's about 15 people on the invitation list across the church, and that is covering all ages and gender and stages. And it's a feedback on the sermon that's just gone and an input into the sermon that's just about to come. And to be in those conversations, there aren't many that are actually able to come, but for me to be in those conversations as the person leading the women's work is so helpful and means that I'm not sort of siloed out. I'm in a kind of teaching conversation. Like, I love to talk about how to teach the Bible because that's what I'm doing on a weekly basis. And so being invited into that conversation has been so edifying for me and for my teaching team to kind of know that we're in this conversation and together we're seeking to grow people in the word as we teach it. What else has been helpful? He gives input into, he's been proactive in asking whether we can talk about what we're going to teach before. The women's Bible study and the men's Bible study actually teach the same thing. That's kind of, the men's Bible study kind of just came off the back of really the women doing what we're doing, and that was kind of growing momentum. So then it's been helpful for the men and the women to be studying the same books together, using the same material, actually, like using our material, which I don't know. I'm undecided yet as to whether that's the best way it should be happening. I think really the men probably need to step up and write their own stuff rather than using ours, but that's probably a bit further down the line. Yeah. I feel like I've just rambled on. I hope that's been helpful in some way. Hit me with some questions. What else, Pete? What else do I need to say?
That's really helpful so far. I like that very gracious comparison between the pastors, which is quite helpful, I guess, for a number of us here. Just do you have an example of? It was quite interesting, like a prep book and then discussion questions. Do you have an example of that you could just stick up on the screen, or is that not something you have?
Yeah. Let me just give me 1 sec.
Yeah, no, thank you. If anybody else has got questions that they want to ask Felicity, I'll open that up after she's done that.
So this comes off the back of over here in America, they're really big on homework before a Bible study. And then the Bible study would often be the same questions as the homework. But then what that means is that the discussion group becomes like a homework check rather than an actual discussion. So we decided so this is the prep book. I don't know whether you can see this. We have like so these are 3 or 4 text digging questions. And then we have some sort of more big picture questions. And then each week we would have up to 8 discussion questions. So this is 45 minutes worth of discussion. And we're drawing on the prep questions. So if they've done the prep, then these questions will be much easier, but we're trying to hit the heart more in that sense. And the person who's written the study also writes a summary as well, so that we have a written kind of, we're just trying to hit from every angle that everyone really grasps what's going on.
So that prep book is that for everybody? Does everybody have that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that, yeah, I'll keep going. Yeah, keep going. So
then I hammer quite hard in the first session that we have expectations that you would have a think and do some reading before you come. It's not obligatory, but discussion will be helped hugely if you've had a think before you come.
And then the summary that person who's written the study writes, I guess, is that more or less the introduction, the 5-minute intro, the big picture? Is it more or less that?
It would probably be more the summary at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, but in a brief form. Yeah.
And whoever writes the study, are they the ones that give the 5-minute introduction at the beginning and so on and tie it together?
Yeah. So they're the ones who sort of lead the evening. Yeah. And that's been that's been one of the things to kind of try, and that's part of the continuum of who feels able to do those things, and gradually we're building up women to be able to feel like they could stand up and give a short summary, or write in fact, as we know, writing Bible study questions, writing good questions, that's a skill, isn't it? So that's been something to really work hard at.
Johnny.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Felicity, so much. As I sort of oversee our small group leaders, this has been really helpful and given me lots of ideas and things to chew on. And you mentioned just towards the end, sort of, it seems like you've got sort of gender separated Bible study groups. Is that right? Men's groups and women's groups. Is that just kind of how it's turned out with the women's ones first, and then they caught up, or is that?
No, well, interestingly, we have small groups. We have something called mission groups, which is a misnomer because there's nothing missional about them. But we have home groups. That's been the kind of the one structure in the church since the very beginning.
Okay.
So that's they meet in people's homes, and so all of us, the whole church is encouraged to be in home groups. And then the women's Bible study and the men's, that's extra actually. And that's one of the tensions that we're trying to work out at the moment. As the church is beginning, as the women's Bible study has grown and then the men's Bible study is happening, we're trying to work out that tension between the small groups and the Bible study. Are they trying to do the same thing? That's one of the things. I don't think the home group is trying to do the same thing as the Bible study, but that's yet to be kind of really teased out. So we have the co-ed, the kind of mixed small groups, and then we have single sex actual Bible studies.
So clearly you're still sort of thinking that through and working that out. But if I were to press you at the moment, I'd be just interested to know, what do you think, do you see value in having the single sex groups alongside the mixed ones?
I see. Yeah. I think that just by the very nature of being single sex in the word, there's a depth of conversation and relationship and honesty, openness that you don't get in a mixed group. I think women are being more open than they have ever been in the mixed setting. And we're very deliberately doing a Bible study, whereas the home groups are not always they're doing maybe a sermon application. It depends on the leader, but they're not always doing a Bible study. And so it's just a slightly different animal, I think. I think there's been huge value in being in single sex groups for this thing.
Thanks.
Thanks, Johnny. Chris?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Felicity. I particularly like your analysis of being a reactive supporter and a proactive supporter. I think I'd probably put myself in the former category, so lots to learn there. Just a slightly different question. What insights do you have in sort of encouraging gifted women evangelists that you've met or in your church currently?
I'm a big believer in one-to-oneing being a kind of a great starting point, both with believers and unbelievers, actually. So if someone is got the real evangelistic bug, then relationally, like, where are their intentional relationships, and then seeking to get the Bible open if they can in that relationship. But within our Bible study structure, like year plan, we always have at least one. I'm hoping to get a second one in their evangelistic event, and that then provides opportunity for the evangelists amongst us to have opportunity to invite people and to help give that talk. Maybe we're at early stages on that, and over here evangelism is weirdly lacking, so we're starting way back on that.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. And John? Yeah, Mike.
It was thank you, Felicity, and it's encouraging to see how your minister was proactively supporting the women's ministry. Is there other ideas whether at your church you've seen where ministers have done things in similar to that or in slightly different ways, which have very publicly been helpful to say what's happening here is really important?
Well, even just, and this is going to reflect badly on the guy before, but the thing is about him, it wasn't intentionally not doing it. He just wasn't being intentional about it, if you see what I mean. So from as soon as this guy came, then it's been announced from the front fairly regularly, like, if you're a woman here and you want to, you should go and get involved in this. And so it's been on the notice sheet, it's been announced. That's been really helpful. He's got a couple of others up to ask us about it, and if we've been up to do something. So I gave my testimony recently, and at the end of that he's like, and by the way, this is what Felicity does, and you should totally go along to this thing. So using the opportunities to give women visibility on that front, and then if there's opportunity to say a bit more. We're just actually going to have a meeting this week. With a growing, so we now have 50 people signed up to women to Bible study, which not everyone comes, but that's just quite a large number. And so with that comes a care issue, pastoral care issue. I think we have a sort of a fringe as well, and so trying to be on the front foot with that. We're going to have a meeting with him this week, me and my kind of care little team that I'm gathering, to think through what the visibility on that is. Like, I think what would be helpful is if he kind of named us, like there's this kind of care, not named us, but there's this care group who are interested in caring for women. We know about this, is connected pastorally with the elders. I think one of the problems can be that there's just lack of communication between all the different aspects of the leadership. And for me, leading the women's work, then that can feel really hard to be left out, but also then to be not aware. So then you end up doubling up on things. So, this woman's spoken to the elders, but I didn't know about that. And I've then instigated something else. And so keeping the women leading in the loop is really, really helpful. Over communication rather than under communication is always best, I think. Yeah, I can't think of anything else.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Felicity, thank you very much. Please send Jonathan our best regards, firstly.
Will do.
Secondly, obviously, you've enjoyed coming to the situation you were in the States at Hope. You had the benefit of read, mark, learn at St. Helens. You had the benefit of a good amount of Word 1-to-1. So you actually walked in quite well equipped to get to the point where you were able to provide a structure where the kinds of notes, preparation, etc., was being put in place.
Yeah.
How would you advise someone going about it where, for example, you're in a relatively small church, you have a woman who is willing, who has been well taught, but has not been taught necessarily as well in the disciplines and the skills that you've developed at St. Helens and other places? How would you advise that situation to be bootstrapped, if you will?
Yeah. You're right. I've been very privileged in how I have been trained in that way. I think if the woman is is keen, if she's also aware that she's not, if she's keen for those skills, then the leadership suggesting that she goes on a, you know, I don't know whereabouts you are in the country, but on one of these Northwest Training or Cornhill, whatever it may be, or there are online Simeon Trust, that's more American, but online courses as well, like seeking to equip in ways that they would feel confident. But again, I do think the giving her confidence through a small group, a one-to-one kind of setting. So she gives it a go with someone on a one-to-one basis, which then builds then the culture within the church anyway, which is, that's the culture that you want to then, so that you're not just one person leading this crowd. You want to be building a team. And so maybe it's about that woman connecting with the people who potentially are teachable, or, and they're kind of learning together, like, let's together do this online course, or let's together make the trip down to London, whatever it may be. I think that's probably where I'd start. My sister actually, they recently started a church, and very skeletal kind of women's Bible study stuff going on. And that's how she's gone about it, that she's basically picked 2 people, and the 3 of them together are kind of making steps towards making it happen. So I think kind of thinking small with the long-term aim of the bigger picture.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if there are any more or not. I've one about the people who you do one-to-ones with. Are they all people who are part of the bigger Bible study as well? Or, because I'm thinking about some of the flaky people, the people who are kind of on the edge. Do you like? Do they come to the Bible study and then you see people and you think, oh, potentially do one-to-ones with them, or is it the other way around? What way does it work?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixture. And what I would, as in my role as kind of seeking to grow the people who are able to open up and teach the Bible, then I'm not going to be reading with those people, but I'm going to be telling other people to go and do that. So the people that, so my small group leaders now, so we had a meeting last week, it was the end of our semester, and that was my big thrust of the meeting, was who amongst anyone in the church family who you think should be coming to Bible study, come September, come August time, who can you catch this summer and get the Bible open with them, so that they might then want to come to Bible study. So there's that kind of ramp in. There's also then the fringe who do come to Bible study, that then they would be, just by visibility, they're just a bit more easier to pick off in that sense. But yeah, I think it depends on who you are within the church. And you don't like, because for me, I'm able and equipped to equip others. So that's what I want to be doing. That's my emphasis. But for others, they would be the people who'd be more like that pastorally, that person really needs a one-to-one for that reason, or this is to sweep them into Bible study, or this is to just persuade them to come to church more often, or whatever it may be.
Okay. And is there, I'm just looking around, anybody can put their hand up the one, but is, in terms of demographics, so we have quite a lot in Riverside, there's quite a lot of seniors, which is great. But I guess they'd probably be slightly less used to this. I mean, you're saying over in America, people don't really do one-to-ones anyway, so maybe this is an easy answer. But in terms of the seniors who are really not used to this, do you do many Bible studies with, the 70-year-olds or anything like that?
Well, sadly, our church doesn't have many, but the few that we do have, there's something about, they're the most valuable people. You've been a Christian for 50 years. Like, all this is you and this other person sitting at the feet of Jesus and opening up this powerful word together. I think we sort of have to demystify what a one-to-one is. Like, I did a session recently, and there were quite a few older people there, and like that sort of terminology of reading the Bible one-to-one, maybe that's not that helpful. Maybe it's actually just get the Bible open and talk about what you love about Jesus, or what you loved about the sermon on Sunday. Like having a sort of a lower ramp in to make that possible. Yeah, because I think there's definitely a fear amongst the older folk that they're not quite up to where we're at, and you just trying to persuade them, that Titus 2 is very true, and we need you. Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful. Great. I don't think there's any other questions. And Felicity, I really appreciate that's very helpful. If you're finished as well, then we might just spend the last. I might put people in the breakout rooms in the last little while. We can just be praying and chatting about what we've heard, and maybe as we go into groups, we could just talk about what does the situation look like in your churches right now that you're in, and what step might you take following even today? What might be the next step, just following what Felicity's presented to us today. Is there anything else you need to say, Felicity, before we do that?
No, that's great. Thank you so much for letting me come and speak to you all.
Thanks a lot.
Feel free to get in touch if you have any questions or whatever. Then very happy to.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to open the breakout rooms and then go into them, and then I'll close them at 3:05. But feel free to be finished at 3:00. But I think just take that question in. What might the next step be in your own situation, or if you have anything to add to that, or anything really productive to give to one another on that. So we'll go into groups now.
I'm going to go then, Pete. And
okay, thanks, Felicity. Thank you very much.
All right.
See you later on.
Bye. All right. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Yeah, it feels.
Oh, sorry. I'll stop recording.